I'd first like to just know, like, when you think innovation, what do you think? What does it mean to you?
Risk, newness, gosh, creativity, change.
And as I was thinking through this, I think about innovation is not necessarily something new, but kind of along the lines of what you're thinking is the connectivity of maybe something old and something new and doing it in a different way, or so along those lines. But I also think that, I know one said this, but I feel like in a lot of ways, especially in the world that we live in, tech is always, new technology is always associated with innovation, and I don't feel that that's really, it's not all there is, right? And so some of the best innovations are the simplest things. I was trying to think of the best example today, and the best thing I could come up with was a paperclip. It's a piece of metal that's bent 3 times. And I mean, how many people use that? How often is it used? I mean, it's all the time. There have been all kinds of different iterations of it because people want to, make it prettier. They want to, but it's still the same thing. It's still this like bent piece of metal or plastic, and it's used all the time. As we think of innovation, we think of maybe bigger things, but generally it's the smaller things that make up the bigger things, or the smaller things that lead to the best innovation. So if you are calling what you're doing innovative, or if you are calling your product innovative, then it might not be. Because it has, in my mind, it has to be used by someone else and recognized by someone else to sort of give it that validity of, okay, yeah, maybe that is innovative, because if other people are finding it useful and helpful in what they're doing, then that is probably more valuable than your personal opinion of where it came from. Because I think we tend to use the word innovation a lot in this day and time, and it's probably overused. Gestures play a huge role for both me and you, so a speaker and a listener in both regards. And so oftentimes the gesture is invaluable to the action, right? If you don't have the gesture, then the action doesn't make as much sense. And then relating the innovation to gesture, Motherwell and his contemporaries were part of a whole new artistic sort of era. And he used really simple gestures, but he broke from tradition. His gesture was not necessarily abandoning tradition, but using tradition as a building block to what he was doing. We have talked about the energy here, and I would say that a lot of modern innovation is born out of a more energetic composition. Getting into innovation in Chattanooga, I would say that everything that I've seen or I'm familiar with as far as innovation in Chattanooga had a level of risk involved. I don't know if you're familiar with the Urban Design Challenge that River City put together, but a couple years ago they asked some teams of architects, planners, designers to come up with what different parts of downtown could look like. And that, in my mind, was a really good gesture of innovation, because you see, as time has gone by, you'll see a couple of projects kind of pop up that were very related to those initial concepts that people came up with. And I would say also Unify Ed, if you're not familiar with that organization, is a really good gesture of innovation, in that they said, okay, we have a problem with public education in Chattanooga, K through 12. What are we going to do about it? Well, volunteering an hour at school is not enough, right? It doesn't solve the problem. And so how do we get to the root cause? And so they're actually getting people more engaged in running for school board, which is where issues in education really start, and taking a more political approach, which is really important to affect sort of the root cause of why our education is not what it should be. And then a real simple one is this couple in Avondale who decided that the kids in their neighborhood weren't eating breakfast every day. And that caused a problem because they couldn't concentrate, right, at school. So they just started feeding the kids in their neighborhood every day at the bus stop. And they've continued to do it. And so those are really this maybe a larger effort to a real kind of pared down to a real simple effort. But
Somebody that I work with saw that gesture of innovation and then decided that in the children's emergency room that we should be maybe giving out bags of food to people who are hungry. So now that's something that we do because of their gesture.
So gestures are contagious.
I mean, typically, right? I mean, people will see stuff and think that's the simplest thing. Those people just decided they're going to feed these kids. Well, you know, I mean, it has this ripple effect that's, and it's also very, they're not relying on the government, they're not relying on nonprofits, existing entities, they're just saying, what can I do? Okay, this is what I can do, and it makes a huge difference. Some of the biggest things in Chattanooga would be the way that we have, and you hear this a lot, so it might be a cliche, but I think it's really important, and that is public and private partnerships. So Chattanooga, from the beginning of the revitalization that started in the mid to late 80s, had a really good group of citizens, again, who were charged with improving the waterfront. Well, they kind of came up with this plan, and they figured out the direction they wanted to go, but they then they got the public entities involved.
Embracing of the city for public art. You know, if we're going to bring it back to art a little bit. Because I've been involved in the arts all my life, and this is the first place I've lived that really, I know there are other cities that embrace public art, but for a city of this size to really reach out to the artistic community on a regular basis, and all these great foundations around, like the Lyndhurst Foundation and Causeway, and you know, we've raised funds for a lot of projects around the city. I think it's really a beautiful thing. The most current one coming up is the large MLK District mural project that is going to be huge with Meg Seligman Studios. So I see Chattanooga as a city and the people therein, which make up that city, having this bold gesture of taking this mid-sized city and making it a strong artistic voice in the South. So we are kind of catapulting ahead of a lot of other mid-sized cities here in the South. I think it's beautiful.
And that kind of gets to like the most important part of any gesture or any action really is that it requires us. It requires civic participation, right? And that's, you know, whether you're a student, a professional, an elementary kid, it doesn't matter. It requires us, and the reliance on other people, or like we were talking earlier, like the government, whatever. It doesn't do any good unless we're involved, because the more of us that have a passion about something, then the more you're going to get a larger entity behind it. So I really think that this is kind of all I have, but really that we should be asking ourselves, what are we doing? What are we contributing as gestures or actions? What are we doing? And so I just challenge you to think of that, because when I think of Art+Issues, I think that any sort of issue that there has to be an action involved, right? And so I just challenge you to think, like, what is your action? What is your contribution to pushing Chattanooga to that next level?